Hear now the word of the Lord. Then Jesus said to his disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do now? Now that my master is taking the position away from me, I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. So I have decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? And he answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. And he said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. When we were getting ready to move to Alaska, we had to have a moving sale. This is back in 1996, and we were not allowed to take a bunch of furniture because we had to freight everything to Alaska. So we were basically told, just like Jesus told his disciples, carry no purse or extra pair of sandals. We had to unload everything. So we had this big moving sale, and during the sale, a man came into the house in a wheelchair, and he was being pushed by a friend. He was looking at a television in our bedroom. It was an older television. I didn't think it was in the best of shape. I thought it was worth about $25. That's what I was going to sell the television for. And so when I was talking to him about the television, the disabled man told me that how he ended up in a wheelchair. His wife shot him, left him disabled. So he was moving out of the house into an apartment and filing for divorce to start his life over. So he needed stuff for his apartment. And so I was just going to give the guy the TV. I was like, you can have it. But he wanted to look around some other things. So he did, continued to look. I got distracted with another customer. And just out of the corner of my eye, I see this man being wheeled out of the house with our television in his lap. And so I go over to Julie and I say, I was planning on giving him that TV. Did you give it to him? She goes, oh, no, I didn't. I got $100 for it. My wife is clearly a much better business person than I am. She took a disabled man's $100 bill for a disabled man who was shot by his wife for a TV that was not worth much more than about $25. Now, lest you think my wife is ruthless and uncaring, you'll know better than that if you know her, but she did know we needed the money for missionary work. We were not operating a clothing closet or furniture closet. She was shrewdly working our makeshift business for the sake of the kingdom ultimately, even though I've been riding her about this for years. The disabled man asked her how much for the TV. She said $100, and he left happy with the TV. I bet he wouldn't have been so happy if he'd found out I was going to give it to him. Now, I was reminded of this story when I read the gospel reading this week. This is Jesus' most difficult parable. So much has been written about it. Nobody can really get it right. It's the parable of the dishonest manager. If you saw verse 9, I mean, that's a tough verse. And the commentaries are all over the place. It's a frustrating parable. So what we're going to do today is something a little different. We're going to do a little Bible study. So I want you to have that parable right in front of you. We're going to do a little Bible study because I just don't know any other way to help make sense of this parable, if at all I can make sense of it. So chapters 15 and 16 of Luke. We've been in chapters 15 and 16 for a few weeks. There are 4 parables in those 2 chapters. Okay? We got the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin. We have the parable of the prodigal son. And then today's parable, the parable of the dishonest manager. Now remember, last week we talked about the lost sheep and the lost coin. They pretty much have the same meaning. I preached on them. The next 2 parables, the prodigal son, you know the story, right? The prodigal gets his inheritance early from his father. He squanders it all. Then he's desperate to come back because he's in a pigsty with the pigs. And he just wants to come back and be a farmhand for his father, just so he can eat. So you know that story. But that story doesn't sound at all relevant to this story today. At all. But they kind of are. So I want to look at the similarities. I'm going to go over a few similarities between the parable of the prodigal son, which we all know and love, and today's parable. And the first similarity is this. The parable of the prodigal son and today's parable, in both of those parables, you have 2 subordinates who squander their superior's property. Right? The prodigal son squanders his father's property, and the dishonest manager squanders his boss's property. So there's your first similarity in this parable. Now, we don't know how exactly the parable of the dishonest manager squandered his boss's property. Maybe creative accounting. So here's the second similarity between the prodigal son and the dishonest manager. The prodigal son and the dishonest manager were both desperate. The prodigal son found himself starving and at rock bottom, and the dishonest manager was losing his job, so he was going to be at rock bottom because he was an older guy. So both characters are desperate. So the first similarity, you have subordinates squandering their superior's property. The second similarity, you have 2 characters that are desperate. All right, that's 2 similarities. The third similarity, both the prodigal son and the dishonest manager were schemers. The prodigal son schemed a plan. I'll come back humbly to my father and say, I'll just be your farmhand. I'll just work with the laborers, just if you'll take me back and feed me. Okay? He was scheming a way to get back, right? He was probably hoping he wouldn't have to do the menial jobs, right? The dishonest manager also schemed a plan. He knew his superior was about to come and do an audit of the books, so he had to do something to get into the good graces of his boss. So and his boss's debtors. So he schemed a shrewd plan, as you read, by reducing the debt of his boss's debtors. So they were both schemers. So the first similarity: 2 subordinates squander their superior's property. The second one, they were both desperate. The third one, they were both schemers. Sounds like a lot in common between these 2 parables. Here's the fourth one. Both superiors acted unwisely, even foolishly. How was the father in the parable of the prodigal son foolish? He gave his son his inheritance early. And if you were a Jew listening to Jesus tell that, you'd be thinking, what a dummy. Just what a complete fool. The boss man in the parable of the dishonest manager, he's foolish too, because what does he do? He leaves. Says, I'm going to come back and do an accounting of the books. He's giving the dishonest manager time to cook the books again and to come up with a plan. So they're both foolish superiors. So you have in both parables, you got characters who squandered their superior's property. They were both desperate. They were both schemers. And then you have two superiors who were big dummies. Now here's one more similarity. There are actually 5. The 5th similarity is the one that makes today's parable so difficult. In both parables, the desperate schemers are celebrated by the superior. Now we get why the father would celebrate the prodigal son, because we'd all do it too. Our child comes back and is repentant and wants to be back in our family. We're going to celebrate that. But why in the world would the boss celebrate this dishonest manager? That's what makes the parable so hard to understand it, because it doesn't seem in line at all with Jesus' teachings. It doesn't seem in line with good character, good Christian character. Why would you celebrate a dishonest, book-cooking, backstabbing subordinate? Why would you do that? What exactly is worthy of praise in this dishonest manager? He illegally or immorally reduced everybody's debt without his superior's permission. Is it simply because he was shrewd? Well, it can't be just that. Surely there would be a better and more understandable way to praise shrewdness than to praise someone who did something immoral. Why don't we look at the dishonest manager a little closer? Because I think there are 3 exemplary things that we can say about this dishonest manager. We're going to be glass half full right now with this dishonest manager. All right? Here's the first thing. The dishonest manager is in trouble. He knows it. And he knows now that his life is at a real crisis point. He got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and it's going to be fired when the audit is done. There's no escape for him. Decision day, judgment day is coming. He knows he's in a crisis situation. The New Testament word for crisis, or it's krisis, and it means a time of decision and judgment. This dishonest manager knows that time is now, and he can't sit idly by. He has to do something to help himself, because he knows he's in a crisis. He knows it's a time of judgment and decision. Do we who name ourselves Christian, do we realize how much of a crisis we're in? I mean, sitting idly by is what sometimes we do in our relationship with God. Maybe we do this too often. We just kind of sit passively. We treat our faith like spectators. We come to church. We hope for a good sermon. We at least one that won't put us to sleep. We go home. We might help out a little bit. But our faith is pretty vanilla, you know. There's nothing much different for many of us about being a member of church and a member of a civic club. It's easy. It's really easy to be passive and complacent in your faith. It's easy to forget we are all in crisis at this moment. We live our comfortable lives, with our comfortable salaries, with our comfortable pension, our comfortable church. We go through the motions daily, forgetting that we are always and every day and every moment in a crisis, in a real spiritual crisis, because judgment is coming. Judgment is coming. And we always have a decision to make every day. Every day we are tempted to make small moral compromises, tell little white lies, fudge our taxes a bit, turn a blind eye to the suffering around us. Every day that we are above ground, we must make a spiritual and moral choice. Every day is a crisis. Every day is a decision to follow Jesus or not. That's the first exemplary thing we can say about the dishonest manager. He knew he was in a crisis. He knew he needed to act. The second exemplary thing we could say about the dishonest manager is that because he's in a crisis mode, rather than telling lies to himself, he makes an honest assessment of himself. The dishonest manager manages to make an honest assessment of himself. He says, I'm too old to do hard labor. I'm too proud to beg. He admits it. I'm too proud. Both physically and spiritually, the dishonest manager recognizes his weaknesses and his failures. He doesn't sugarcoat himself. He fully admits he's weak. He knows he alone got himself in this mess, and it's because of his weakness. Do you know what the fourth step of Alcoholics Anonymous is? Out of the 12 steps, it's got to be the most difficult one. The fourth step is and I love the language here, making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. The only way that we can truly make a decision for Christ is to make a searching and fearless account of where we fall short. We must be honest with ourselves. We must examine our lives and our conscience daily. For 2,000 years, the church practiced what's called the examination of conscience, where at some point during the day, usually the end, there would be a list of questions that they asked themselves to reflect on the day, to reflect on where they fell short of the glory of God and where they affirmed the glory of God. And John Wesley did this too. He had the 22 questions he had Methodists do. They're back there. And I'd offered them starting last Advent. They're back there. That this is taking a searching and fearless moral inventory and spiritual inventory of ourselves. John Wesley did it. The early Methodists did it. And I think there are plenty of them there. And if that's not something we want to do, then I must ask, why don't we want to do that? Do we think we don't need to do it? Are we too afraid to do it? Too afraid to change? Here's the third exemplary thing we can say about the dishonest manager. He acts. He acts. He does not throw up his hands and give up. He is not lazy. He moves. He does something about his crisis. He acts. He moves dishonestly. Make no mistake. And he is not commended for his dishonesty. He's not. He is commended because he acts. And how often do we say to ourselves or others, boy, am I guilty of this. I really need to exercise. I really need to lose a few pounds. I really need to save more money. I really need to get my prayer life in order. I really need to go to church more. I really need to give more. Thinking or saying these things does us no good at all. No one is going to commend us for saying or thinking, I really need to. We don't get commended for that. We don't get commended for our intentions. We don't get commended for our feelings. We don't get commended for just saying the right things. You can talk about how you need to do something all day, but it means nothing at all unless you do it. You can tell someone you love them all day, every day, but if you don't act on that love, well, as Paul says, it's just noise. It's just noise. And the dishonest manager, even though he acted in a way that was contrary to good faith, he nevertheless acted. The dishonest manager realized he was in crisis, and he made a searching and fearful account of himself, and then he acted. Those three things, realizing you're in crisis, making a searching and fearful account of yourself, and taking action on that, that's what it takes to make a decision for Jesus Christ. Not just one time in your life, but every day. The time to act on our relationship with God is now. The prodigal acted because he was desperate for the grace of his Father. The dishonest manager acted because he was desperate for the grace of anyone who would offer it when he is left jobless and penniless. How desperate are you? How desperate am I? How desperate are you for friendship with God? How desperate, what lengths will you go to receive the grace of God's friendship? Are we desperate enough? Are we desperate enough to realize that we are in a daily crisis of faith? Are we desperate enough to make a searching and fearless moral and spiritual inventory of ourselves every day? Are we desperate enough to act now and receive the grace and mercy of God? Let us take a moment of silence.